Alright, so I thought I'd make this video because I think it's going to be a good time to get into altcoins. Now, I don't want you to take my word for it. I'll give you some rationale on why I think that's going to be a good idea. But if you get nothing out of this video, I encourage you to at least research a few of your favorite projects and educate yourself. So where do we get started? Well, I've got a couple of indicators that I like to use, and what you see on the screen here is a momentum indicator. Now, momentum in charts is typically something like a moving average. The main idea is if you have a chart, typically it goes up, typically it goes down. If you're bullish, you would like it to spend a lot of time going up. If you're bearish, you would like to spend a lot of time going down. This indicator here, we can talk about it in future videos if there is interest, but it basically just shows when it's above the zero line over here. It's typically a good time to be long. It means price is going up. I've got a list of about 10 altcoins here, so what I'd like to do is just go one by one, some a little quicker than others, and give you the setups. All right, we'll get started like usual with the Bitcoin chart. We're on the daily time frame. Now, daily is a really good time frame if you're a swing trader. If you like to day trade, you can drop down to the 15-minute and the 1 hour, etc. You can probably have some fun with that a little bit later. But this is really good if you like to just place your positions and chill out. Let your money work for you. Now, ideally, what you want is a trending market. Otherwise, you're just going to be going sideways, like we've been here in Bitcoin. But if you're good, if you have your alerts, you can also position around that. So what do I see? Well, one of the first things that I like to do is look at swing highs and swing lows. In this case, I'm using TradingView, and there's a lovely tool down here called the horizontal ray. I'll go ahead and add the swing lows that I am drawn to. I like the swing low down here. Why? Because, well, we're on a daily time frame. It's a pretty pronounced swing low, and it's got a little bit of air underneath these other ones, so it just stands out to me, is what I'm getting at. Of course, you've also got this one down over here, but for a reason which I'll explain in a second, I don't usually like to draw those. And then on the other side, we've got these swing highs up here. Again, my eye just happens to be drawn to this one because you have these two spikes on the top and the bottom. We'll talk about that in just a second. All right, so let's zoom out a little bit and we can see what kind of trend we're in. Typically, you like to zoom out a little bit and we'll look at the weekly. So I think a kindergartner could answer this question, but is price going up or is price going down? Well, if you look here from about 2024, you see a big up arrow. So I would think to say that we're bullish. Now, the question is always going to be, price doesn't always go up unless you're NVIDIA, of course, but are you worried about it reversing? In fact, if you look over here, January, you had a pretty nasty sell-off, but eventually you found your footing. But if you look back over here, for example, 2021, you had a pretty long sell-off. So the question is going to be, is that where we're getting into? So what I've always found is that you really need to let the chart confirm itself. And you can play around these levels, say swing highs if you're just very active. But I think even if you bought up here and long, do you believe in Bitcoin? You're probably fine, right? Why? Because even though you had a pretty big bear market, you never really even took down this COVID low over here. See that? Nice swing low. You did take out this one. That was scary. If any of you have been here since this was the COVID bubble, when we pumped the economy full of free money. And then a big crash. And then really ever since then, it's just been up and to the right. Big multiples if you got positioned down there. All that is to say is that until we start making lower lows, lower highs, I think we're in an uptrend. Now that picture isn't quite the same for our altcoins, so we'll see that in just a second. But all right, so let's go ahead and get rid of this guy right here. Zoom in just once more. So why do I think it's a good time to buy altcoins? Well, the thing that makes me nervous is that Bitcoin is changing character just a hair right here. There's something called a Wyckoff schematic, If I pull it up on my screen here, give me a moment, you'll see what that looks like. And 3, 2, 1, we're back. So using a little bit of video editing magic. So I found this chart here. Wyckoff, if you're not familiar, is a bit of a distribution or a accumulation pattern. You never really know what it is until it breaks, and that's kind of the whole point of what I'm going to be getting at here at the conclusion of the Bitcoin analysis. But this analysis is pretty spot on. You've got a BC, a buying climax, about right here, and you could draw it a couple ways. Maybe this right here is your buying climax. Maybe this is your UTAD. Maybe we're coming up for a UTAD test. The point is that the schematic here, you can overlay it and you can draw a couple ways to say, hey, maybe this is distribution. But take a look at the bottom down right hand side over here. Go and get rid of this one. If you haven't guessed, I've got a couple of inspirations for my analysis. One is ICT, of course. If you are familiar with his work, you can probably see that I've adopted his color scheme, which is a nice homage. But really the big thing he looks for is swing highs, which we marked out, swing lows. So the question is, well, why didn't I mark the swing high right here? Why didn't I mark that swing low down here? Well, you could, and we might as well over here. But the big point is, when you're looking at a sideways market, it tends to pay very well if you're buying the supports down here and then getting the retrace. So if you see down here, we actually swept the swing low, but you got a nice reversal down here. We'll go and zoom in here just a little bit, and I promise we won't get too much into the very technical analysis here. This is really just a primer. But take a look at how we swept down here, closed, and then as soon as we close, in fact, about right here, it's a really good place to buy back. So you might see this little pattern down here. What you're really looking for is a bit of a zigzag. As long as this is true, and I know the market is very shaky right now, but as long as that pattern is holding, well, what's it doing? You're going up, okay? So you could always, if you take out this swing low down here, for example, then I think we got to abandon the bullish thesis. Swing low, maybe even a retest, swing low. That's going to be a little bit more bearish. In fact, I would say very bearish. We've got some economic drivers here that might roll that out. But if you come back here, delete some of those lines, come back to the daily, as is, we've already taken that liquidity. The market has proved that it wants to go back up. In fact, you have a nice bullish fair value gap right there. As long as we close around here within the next day, that's a pretty bullish sign. What is our target? Typically, if you're being very aggressive, you can come back to the swing high. If you're more of a day trader, 50% is good. I am particularly drawn to that swing high right there. Or if you want to be a little bit more aggressive, you can come back to that swing low, to that imbalance right here. This right here. Or if you want to just go ahead and hold on to the position for full-blown swing high and beyond, that's really what I'm going to try to do here. Okay, let's go and clean up the chart just a little bit and zoom back out. All right, so Bitcoin is a little special. It's one of the oldest cryptocurrencies, so it tends to be a little bit more sideways and boring. But for the rest of these, we're going to look at some of the altcoins. Okay, up next is Ethereum. So this really is the altcoin indicator. If you're going to have an alt season, you really need ETH to break out over here. We're going to zoom out in just a bit, but like before, why don't we just get our bearings here in the short term and look at the daily? This one's actually a little bit different to Bitcoin. You can actually tell it's a little bit weaker in some respects. Like usual, let's go ahead and draw swing lows over here. And what's really cool about this chart is you can actually see the big capitulation. If you're here the weekend before last, you could have seen a lot of these altcoins just swan dive. It was actually very scary. You don't see that very often. And that's really the biggest reason why I personally am more bullish than bearish over here. But ultimately what you do have is a very sluggish Looks kind of heavy, consolidating chart. You can see that it just doesn't want to make up its mind yet. There's actually some economic news a little bit later this week. Hopefully we can make something happen over here. But for now, you have to assume it's bearish. But that being said, take a look up here. You have these very clear swing highs. I think that's a pretty obvious target to go long into. And I'll give you two reasons on why I am also a little bit more bullish than bearish right here. Let's zoom out to the monthly, clear up some of these lines. So in charts, typically you have uptrends when you're making higher highs and higher lows. And if we look at the monthly chart down here, it gets a little messy with the big bear market of 2022, but I'll try to draw it. It gets pretty hairy. Technically, I think that was a higher high, lower low, so that one was actually pretty messy. ETH has been quite a little bit of an agent over here, hasn't it? But take a look over here, at least in the short term. Higher high, a lot of room to make a higher low. You also have this shelf over here. So what is that? That's just a simple back test. Breakout, retest. Question is, do we hold? Do we break? Well, we should know the answer by the end of this week. Now, if you're wanting to front run it, if you're bullish, you're going to try to buy into the support. If you're bearish, you probably want to wait for this swing low to be lost first. That would be my thought. But the other thing that's drawn to my eye, let me go ahead and get rid of this arrow over here. It's the all-time high swing over here. See that? So in markets, typically equal highs are drawn to. You could also make the argument that there's some equal lows down here, so pick your poison, really. But I think given the back test from the summer swing high over here, and not having a very deep pierce into this all-time swing high is going to be attractive for buyers, in my opinion. Okay. Let's go ahead and take one more look at the daily and just get a little bit more of a feel for what's happening over here. You can see we're having a little bit of a down arrow. One of my favorite techniques is drawing trend lines. So my eye is drawn towards this taper down here, and you can actually visualize that with some of these trend lines. It's a little bit of an art how you connect these lines. I like to get the most touches as possible. You can see, hey, why am I ignoring that one? Well, that was the big capitulation. So a lot of exchanges went down, a lot of people panicked, and that caused a little bit more acceleration. But typically the market is friendly enough to follow these lines. And then on the top, you can either try to draw it. I like to clone it, so let's try that. Try to position. And same idea, you want to try to get some of the most touches. I don't really see a great fit, but maybe about right here. Again, people get a little excited towards the tops, so it makes sense you have that. So what do we have? To me, very boring, very choppy, very undecided. I know we've had very exciting swings, but until we break out of the flag over here, whether that's going to be bullish, that would be very bullish, right? Big old bear flag launch. Or if we start losing the swing low down here, that'd probably be pretty bearish. We don't have a ton of support until maybe 2000 down here. Bunch of air. Maybe you could take that swing low at 33.47 down there. As of now, I think it's very undecided. This is a consolidation pattern, at least on the very short term. Generally, I lean bullish because of the monthly all-time high swing high. But we'll see. Maybe I'll make an update video at the end of the week if we break out from FOMC. But you can see here, very clear consolidation. I think Wednesday is also the CPI. You're going to get a indicator which shows the inflation of the economy. But until then, we just have to wait. Of course, if you want to be a little day trader here, you've got a little bit of a head and shoulders, but I never really liked this pattern. But it's there. And if you played it, then you would have made a little bit of change there. I'll erase that before I get myself into trouble. So what do we think about Ethereum? It's looking a little bit weak on the very short term, but I think the back test against the shelf up here and then the all-time high grab is going to want us to go higher. Not to mention the big capitulation we saw. All right, up next we have ADA. So we're going to go through the alts a little bit quicker. Even though I'm going to give these less attention, I really think this is where the opportunity is. And without being too immature, I really think you can just get into any of these projects and you're probably going to have a good time. That's my guess. The big rationale is one, Bitcoin, very bullish. Ethereum, I think it's going to have a breakout. Alts have a lot of room to go up. So what do we see on the ADA chart here? Well, first off, I'm zoomed out pretty far, but one really interesting quirk about altcoins is that they tend to move really quickly. That can be a good thing or a bad thing, just depending on what side you're on. Let me come back here to the daily. So this is going to be a lot more pronounced on smaller caps, but if you think about the way these coins actually pump, is that it doesn't take a lot of time. So for example, from here, November to about December, that was about a month. That was a incredible run by ADA over here. About a 300% right there if you got into the bottom. And you had a lot of time to accumulate. And we're actually going to use a similar technique here to try to position ourselves on ADA. But the point is that these things can happen really quickly. Unfortunately, like we saw with the capitulations, they can also fall very dramatically. So there is risk. It's not going to be a free lunch. You're going to need to have conviction if you want to trade these markets. You're probably going to lose money. That's my disclaimer. But I think that if you're willing to go small and manage risk, there's ways you can do that. Then I think that the upside is a little bit more likely than the downside. That's my personal opinion. All right, let's take a look at the weekly. So I think alts are a little bit harder to day trade just because they're very wicky. ADA is a pretty good example. Goes up, goes down, goes up, goes down really quickly. But take a look at some of the trend line techniques over here. So we saw this a little bit on ADA, but if you're able to line up the right wicks, you can actually see a pretty powerful breakout. Now, this last couple of years has been very disappointing because typically after a nice big run up, you're going to get a big reset or a big drawdown, right? Which, by the way, if you're also wanting to try to play it from the other side, you can draw a trend line like that. So really what you're trying to do with a long position here is enter long on the break and then either just hold it. Like if you held here, you'd probably be pretty happy. This one was, in my opinion, a pretty hard one to catch. But if you're wanting to just hold it forever after a big consolidation like that and a big bear market like that, you'd probably be pretty happy if you were holding since 2024, even though it looks like it's gone sideways. I know it's pretty rough for some of the other alts. 78% gain is really good, all things considered. But the point of that is if you want to be a little bit fancy, you can try to catch these breakdowns. Now, they're typically very dramatic, they're hard to time, and you can get whipped pretty badly, but that's an option. And if this market really gets going, we're going to see if we can't time some of those ourselves. Okay. So what do we see over here? Well, on ADA, this one's pretty clear. If you break above this line, then you're probably going to be pretty bullish. And it might sound like a bit of a stretch, but I think at least you're going to get to this swing high up here. So that would be about 160. In fact, I was thinking that this would break out to that level as well, but you can actually see we had a slightly lower swing high right there and had a pretty negative reaction. But it's been consolidating since. But of course, if we just get really heated, and this might look crazy, but remember what I said, so this pump happens really quickly. Take a look back over here in 21. You had about 4 weeks, about a month to multiply your money pretty dramatically right there. Not amazing, 150. Some of the other alts are a little bit more impressive. The point is, it's going to be pretty hard to catch this. So I think a good idea might be to DCA. whatever some of your favorite projects are, I think you can pretty easily clear out this all-time high. You've also got this very big cup pattern. There's not really an art to this, by the way, but by about May, April, June, so maybe the end of quarter 1, that might be a good place to at least take first profit. And typically what you get with these types of patterns, if we do actually do this, everyone's going to be very excited. You typically get a pullback, and even if you are bullish, you're going to make a nice cup and handle. So plenty of opportunity to buy back the dip, but this is going to be the hard part. In my opinion, you want to be a buyer down here. Position up. But I'm drawing all these arrows up. What about to the downside? Well, same idea. Let's go and zoom in here to the weekly. Draw our swing lows. So you did tap the swing low, so you do have what you call a equal low down here, and that is actually a pretty strong magnet if you ask me. So I have to assume we're pretty bearish on this guy, but it's a little bit conflicted. Going back to our friend ICT, he might draw a fair value gap like this one. He might also draw your eye to the swing high up here. But now we've lost it, unfortunately, so it's very, very wishy-washy in my opinion. I personally think on the higher time frames, even if it might take a little bit more time, a couple weeks, that would actually be, in my opinion, a blessing if you're able to position down into the block down here. Now, if you really have to swing out this low, that's probably not great. I'll admit, if you get down to about 31 down here, that's probably not going to be ideal for a bullish run, but that would probably be a best entry, I would think, if it crashes again. Or if you need to just consolidate and shake people up a little bit more, I think you would like to set an alert here at 50 cents. Personally, I think with the capitulation a couple weeks ago, the low is already in, and we're just consolidating. Another technique that I'm inspired by is the quick fingers Luke method. The really short version is if you get a big buy reaction, so this is a really good one. See how there's a low right there and it gets a really nice big check mark? Maybe you can say there's one right here. Typically what price likes to do is come back and revisit these areas. Now we did already revisit it down here. That's the big one right there. And it rejected. But you took some more liquidity. And maybe at minimum, if things get a little excited, you can come back over here. So I would think if you're not long-term bullish, you want to get out on a second bounce if we do get it, and if you're long right here. Okay. But see that big capitulation? I think that's a good reason to look for longs. A lot of people got taken out. We've been consolidating for years. If you want to be a little bit more conservative, I know it's going to be quite a bit higher, but you can also wait for your trend line. Maybe it'll look something like that. But if you want to see how ADA moves, unfortunately you can see it a little bit right here. It doesn't really offer you that much back test. And then of course right here, off into the races. Maybe if you're really brave, you can get in on some of these wicks. But it's gonna feel very fast, and it's gonna be hard to catch that in my opinion. But there's ADA, so grand scheme of things, I think we're looking for higher. If we have to sweep low a little bit more, it'll be a little bit painful, but I think those are ultimately going to be good DCA opportunities. All right, a lot of the altcoins are going to look relatively similar, so to keep this video on the shorter side, I'm going to speed run some of these. I'll try to keep it to about a minute each so that we don't make this an hour-long video. But if there is interest, feel free to drop off a request in the comments and I can look at your coin. The one thing I do ask is to try to give us at least a couple years of history. A lot of the new or low cap coins I won't really be able to analyze very accurately, but I can give you my 2 cents if you do want to hear them. All right, up next is Doge. So what do we see here? It's always a little bit hard with this coin because it's so spiky. You really have to just be in there at the right moment and get out at the right moment. But like we saw on the big capitulation there, you had a pretty big stab down. Now, this is important to the Elliott wave people. It's not quite as important to me, but my eye is drawn to these lows down here. And what the Elliott people will tell you is that you don't want it to erase divergence, right? Now, in my opinion, you kind of do want it to swing to enter, but take a look at that swing low down here, that swing low down here. Technically a higher low, right? So what is that? That's bullish. So as long as you keep this pattern going up, you're pretty nicely going to be targeting the high up here. Now, obviously, it's looking pretty scary right now in the moment, but this is just consolidation. We're going to be waiting for some economic data to make sure that we can break out of this little triangle down here. I would like to at least see this 24 get taken out, but it's looking pretty weak. I can't deny it, but I don't really think there's anything to do in this middle range down here. Wait for a swing low to get taken, test it again. What you're going to want to see is either a displacement down, breakdown, or hopefully if we're being a little bit more bullish and the market doesn't want to scare us too much, you get a breakout, something like this. Boom, boom, off into the sunshine. Or if we need to be a little bit more scary, you're going to have something like this, where you're going to have to swing the low a little bit first. Okay. Up next, let's look at Solana. So Solana's a little bit of a different one because it's been a little stronger this cycle compared to a lot of the other altcoins. Fortunately, my eye is drawn to this Head and Shoulders. I'm not a huge guy on patterns, but they are pretty undeniable. A lot of people watch these and a lot of people will trade on them. But what else do we see? Well, we have these swing highs up here. You could argue triple tops, which is almost 4 quadruple tops. That's very bullish if you ask me. And then of course on the smaller time frames, a little bit of a climbing staircase. Now with that capitulation, you're getting a little scary. You're going to want to reverse pretty soon here. But assuming you can, I do not think that this high is going to have a chance of standing up. Up next, let's take a look at Link. So Link, I think, is a pretty good opportunity here just because you're going really sideways, right? So you have time to accumulate. Let's take a look at some of the trend lines down here. You've got the higher lows, the Elliott wave, people like that. And you have a couple draws up here. So you do unfortunately have that Head and Shoulders look. So if we do lose some of these lows, that would be bad. I think everyone can agree that would be bad. But it's pretty obvious. You've got a nice target right here at about 38. Maybe you could draw a target right here back to 28. I don't think that would hold personally. And then of course, just the bigger all-time high beyond. And remember, I'll keep saying this, but the pumps are going to happen pretty quick. Take a look at the week over here. Boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. All right. As far as entry, let's take a look at the daily. This one looks pretty strong relatively, so I always like to look for the displacement right here on the daily. Of course, we're pulling back. I think there was some AWS FUD out there today, which was kind of funny. I've got a little trading group where we like to joke around a lot. But ultimately, what you also did down here was swing low right there. Perfect place to get long. Your QFL already did repair, so you aren't really safe holding your long. I will preface that. You're not going to have a high probability long, at least, 98%. So you did already repair that. But what is the market doing? It's just going to be consolidating. There's CPI and FOMC this week. Up next, let's take a look at BNB. All right, so BNB has a lot of momentum. I'm not really the greatest at analyzing these charts because it's in price discovery. I typically like to look at levels, but I guess the key takeaways are is if you bought anywhere along this big run up, you're probably pretty happy, unless you bought here this last before the big capitulation. Now, one technique you can do to track these kinds of moves is a Fibonacci. So I'm just drawn to this swing high right here and that swing low down here. There are some settings. These are just simple extensions to 2.5 and 4. You can see we hit the 2.5 pretty nicely down here. So that would have been a take profit. And then if you want to do the reverse Fibonacci to look for support, I like to look at the waves. So obviously we had a pretty big wick right here. I'm going to ignore that for a second. I'm going to look at this swing low. So actually that was a perfect entry right there. You've got a nice golden pocket retrace right there. Boom, long. As long as we don't lose that level right there, we're good. Right now it's about 9:30, so there's a little bit of a tumble right here. But as long as we just chill in this region, I think we're going to be fine. Obviously, we need to shake out a lot of these capitulation buyers. But take a look at that. So you also took out the swing high, which is bullish, according to Elliott Wave. Boom, boom. Now, you had a pretty big retrace, but we can move on. All right, next up is XRP. So I'm not a big fan of XRP. I think the big point is that this coin moves very quickly. If you were positioned down here, you multiplied your money out of nowhere. That was a pretty sweet 455% right there. Same thing in 2018. Now it is holding the highs down here. So what you gotta hope and what you gotta imagine is that we're just going to clear the highs once again. Who knows how high this thing goes? But this has a lot of strength. You are making the higher highs. Looks like you did barely take that wick down here, so maybe that's a downtrend. Very volatile. I don't like trading this because it is so volatile. You're actually in the middle. But you do have this nice little daily imbalance right there. So I think you're leaning long here. Hopefully something like that. If you're lucky, a little retest right off into the sunset. As far as price targets, let's use our fib. Let's use the wick, why not? Might seem crazy, but typically the 2.5 is pretty easy to hit, so maybe a nice $7 or that nice $10. I think people will be very excited if we get $10 in XRP. All right, up next is Mana. So a lot of these have been really crushed. So you've seen some of these stronger altcoins, such as Solana and Ethereum, even though that's been very choppy. But take a look at Mana down here. I have some lines from some previous analysis, but you had a huge run up in 2021, the COVID bubble, and then you just got absolutely slaughtered. So this is really, in my opinion, not specifically Mana. I'm not really a big fan of NFTs in particular, but altcoins that have just been demolished. 95%. That's a very traditional altcoin bear market. Do you want to be buying up here? Or do you want to be buying down here? That's really the main point of my argument, and that's really the reason I'm making this video. But as far as entries, let's go ahead and clean up some of these lines down here. Take a look at the swing lows. This one didn't quite swing it, so that's actually a good sign. Remember, people like it when you don't swing it. But it's pretty weak and it's pretty sideways. You can try to fish for the swing low, but I think as long as you're accumulating, again, I'm not advertising Mana. I don't really even like NFT or gaming tokens, but it's so cheap. And just look at how it goes. It'll move really quickly when it's ready. So that's about a nice 200%, easy peasy. If you do want to be a little bit more patient, I would say maybe wait for a trend line that looks like this. You can put your alert around maybe 32 cents. But then really the bad thing is that you lose a lot of multipliers the later you get in, right? About 40% late. All right, up next is DOT. So DOT's one that I've been watching for a while, and a lot of these coins have this behavior where they try to pump with the stock market and then they fell. Try to pump with the stock market and then they fell. So I really like this chart. Why? Because you have a swing low down here, so you're just able to position long. If you want to manage your risk, typically what you do is you wait for that sweep to occur, close back in the range, and then put a stop loss under the wick. Now, if this thing does lose the stop loss, I will say I don't know how low it's going to go, because I think that capitulation actually took a lot of people out. but very clear, is about as clear as day. You just target the swing high up here. Equal highs, resistance, and that's a cool 300%. Not even a lot of money, and you can get some multiples out there. That's not even counting a big explosion back to all-time high, which I think is going to be possible. Again, what do I keep on saying is that once it gets going, it's going to be very quick. So this year took about 3 months. That gives us a nice bullish Q1. Maybe if we're lucky, it'll be into Christmas time, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Up next is Atom. I won't spend too much time on this chart. It's a lot like Dot. If you like the project, I don't advocate it. It simply was a high market top back in the day. I think a lot of altcoins are going to be easy multipliers personally. You can try to wait for this trend. You can try to wait for this trend. Or if you're bullish on the project, you can identify some swing lows. Maybe that one. I'm trying to see if we took any good ones already. I don't really like this one because it's so before this big pump. My eye is drawn there. So I don't really love the entry, but I think you've got upside here. It's the big point. E-gold, same kind of thing. Now, some of these coins might die, so that's something you really have to worry about. But take a look. This is a 5-year bear market low. If you're not going to buy at the 5-year lows, then you just don't believe in crypto and you think it's going to die. Maybe this coin is dead. Maybe it gets delisted. I don't know what E-gold does. But I think you've got pretty good risk right there, especially if you got in on the capitulation. You're going to be targeting these swing highs right here. That's an easy 500%. Or if we're going to get very excited in the market, just go ahead and target all-time highs. Why not? Last but not least, XLM. This is a XRP type of currency token. It's actually one that I think is going to be useful in terms of functionality. But of course, in crypto, I think a lot of the pumps are random and a lot of alts are going to pump for no reason. But what do we see here? A lot of sideways consolidation. It's strong relative to the market. Got a very big upthrust and it's been holding. 1, 2. I like looking for 3 pumps, but I would think that you're just consolidating. So if you can hold these lows, I think you're going to be in good shape. Of course, if you can break out of the higher trend line up here, or perhaps a little bit earlier, break out of this trend line right here, you're going to be in really good shape. Target very clearly the swing high. All right, and there you have it. So those are some reasons why I think it'll be a good time to get interested in the alt market. To summarize, I think there's been a really big capitulation event. Might still be a couple weeks or a couple months even to shake everyone out and all the knife catchers, but I think there's so much opportunity here. Bitcoin has been strong. It is still strong. Ethereum, if it makes a new all-time high, I think altcoins will very quickly play catch up. You saw how quickly these pumps can happen. And I think if you're not willing to risk a little bit of money here, you can always wait for a little bit of higher. You can get some momentum trades going. But for knife catchers and bottom dwellers, I think this is a really good time to at least get engaged. Do keep in mind some of these can just keep going down to zero. There's always that on the table. But I think altcoins have been beaten up so much that they're going to get a rotation here pretty soon. All right, if you guys have any altcoins you want me to take a look at, I'm happy to take a peek. And we don't talk. See you guys next time. Good luck.